I suppose just to kick us off, it's for me, it's a welcome back to everyone to session 2 of our series of webinars this week, looking at sport pedagogy with Dr. Paul McMillan. I think on Wednesday, Paul took us on a pretty fascinating journey to explore what is pedagogy and who might have the real one, if of course the real one does exist. But before we hand over to Paul, I just wanted to remind us of a couple of ground rules. Number one, that the session is being recorded. It's for your reflection, and I'll send out both recordings over the weekend because some editing needs to be done in advance while people are out in the breakout rooms, just to cut out that dead space. When you do receive it, please don't share it beyond yourself, unless of course you've got express permission from ourselves to do so. Throughout the session, we would appreciate if you were on mute and left your video on, and direct any thoughts, questions, curiosities into the chat, and at which point we'll invite you in to unmute and engage in discussion with Paul, should there be an opportunity to do so. So I guess without further ado, Mr. McMillan, I'll hand over to you to kick us off.
Thank you, Derek, and it's great to be back and to work with hopefully the same people that were here on Wednesday, and then hopefully things will make perfect and great sense as we go through. I've already been looking at the chat box, and I will come to those. Thank you so much if you've been adding and will continue to add. There's some great reflections in there, and also some hopes and aspirations as well for today's session, which I'll try to make links to the reality and the applied nature of what this is about. And we'll get to that. I'll come and take these chat messages shortly. I will start with a recap in general, so there'll be hopefully enough to capture where we were last time, although Derek's done a fine job of explaining where we were, and also some things in the chat have been really helpful to capture that. Today it's going beyond the big picture and saying we've accepted pedagogy as many things, and it involves what some people have called the black hole of practice in the chat from Heather, and other people saying it's this sort of unseen capacities that need to be brought to the table by the coach. So I will get to those things, and it's almost saying, well, how? What does this look like in practice? Could talk about many different possibilities, but I don't want to run too close to time again today. So I'll pick 3 that I think are the most helpful for us. There could be many more, but I'll talk about the need for a coaching repertoire, what that is and why that might be appropriate. I'll talk about vision, which is slightly different from coaching philosophy, which most of you might talk about. It's got links to it and similar, but it's slightly different. And I'll talk about that and why that's important for pedagogy in the big picture. And I'll talk about negotiation of boundaries. Again, this is getting to this applied contextual demand that the coach or coaches find themselves in, and how do we start to manipulate or maneuver boundaries in the short and the longer term to try and make things possible in practice and in context. I have a few closing thoughts as well, which we'll talk about coach learning. I know there's been quite a bit of that already that people are interested in the coaching world, but also in this forum. So a bit of that will talk and link back to different ways than the usual format. So this was the starting point where I was starting from last time, this idea that I'm starting from the perspective that coaching is complex, and we shared one definition which caught my attention in my 2 to 3 month journey through sport coaching literature, was this idea that people are talking about coaching as complex, and North's quote from 2017 I shared last time I thought was particularly vast and diverse for celebrating some of that complexity. And despite that complexity, it seems that coaching is oversimplified, or that complexity tries to be nullified or tries to be pushed to the side, ignored for a number of different reasons. And I just shared reasons from some stakeholders last time that coaches themselves oversimplify so they can function effectively and not get lost. Researchers oversimplify because the methodological tools might not be there to grapple with absolutely everything. So they end up looking at certain factors which might be more important than others. And policymakers, I had another example, may also oversimplify coaching and try to find secrets of success so they can guarantee investment and return on investment and success and so on. So again, I think we need to be mindful that coaching can be oversimplified, and we need to push back against that and acknowledge that it is actually a complex endeavour. To celebrate, or certainly to start to acknowledge that complexity, pedagogy was a term that certainly I advanced that maybe one way of starting to talk about and recognise that complexity. And it was really positive when people in the chat were saying this has got similarities to other ideas in coaching literature. And I really appreciated those links that were being made. People saying the similarities to Abraham and Collins's ideas or to Abraham and Muir's ideas. So it's good to see that it's not completely coming at you cold and not connecting with anything. And I acknowledged it's got its limitations and challenges. Some, but not all, might involve that it's got multiple interpretations, and I shared some last time. Given the popularity, or I said it was trending, or there's been a proliferation and the use of pedagogy in academia and sometimes just general academic settings. We've got some poorly defined ideas about it, and people have actually stopped, or what Stone says, have become a bit coy about even going close or touching pedagogy. So they throw the term around, but don't actually go into real depth, even in some of the academic journals that are out there. And it's also not often used by practitioners. So coaches on the ground, it was positive and reinforcing in the chat that a lot of people were saying it's not used often when we come to coaches talking about practice, and that's something that chimes with education and teachers as well. Despite all those challenges, I was looking to try and also celebrate what it does offer. I think given there's some challenges, I don't think it's something we put aside because there's a few challenges involved. I think that the potential far outweighs the challenges. And we've got this idea about being able to start to acknowledge, or being able to try and grasp the bigger picture, or certainly start to engage with the complexity, which is very often overlooked or sometimes oversimplified or even just ignored. It can sometimes capture sense-making of coaches, again, similar to Abraham's and Collins. It's decision-making, there's judgments involved in the act of coaching, and practices are not just plucked out of the air and part of potluck. Well, you can do that, but it might not be very appropriate. Can provide direction, judgments, rationales for our actions. Knowing and understanding the big picture and how that might inform your practice can help you to justify, provide rationales and judgments for what you do, and also provide a bit of potential to give coaches a voice in a landscape that might be starting to become crowded with increasing interested stakeholders trying to steer and inform and shape what sport coaching might be for them. Exploring pedagogy led to sharing just 3 to 5 definitions that were all very different, and there could have been many more, and suggested that different camps might be one way of capturing where pedagogy might come from and where it might be coming from. Some might be purely fixed in the fixed camp, and others might be purely in the middle of the fluid camp, and others might be plumb in the middle of the transformative camp. Some might be in between those, and some might be spread across them as well. But it was one way, one lens that was looking to try and harness some of the diverse ideas about pedagogy without losing control of where you were with them all. And this was just a little device I designed for my PhD work that helped me to try and grapple with pedagogy, what it is and what people are saying about it in these terms. And it was interesting in the chat and also some helpful discussion in the main room saying how the ideas about pedagogy may shift across different levels of performers. And I think there was an idea that, and I've had to think about this, it really stuck with me when I was, since last session, the idea that is it just elite performers that might be in the fixed camp and trying to squeeze every ounce of performance out of athletes, and is it just maybe grassroots level that's looking at fair play and bigger, wider ideas about transformation and so on? And I think we can see examples of both cutting across there. Certainly at the elite level, I think there's increasing pressure on athletes to be role models in different ways and start to think about what other contributions they're making as well. So I think there's a bit of potential there for crossover at different levels, but we'll chat on that later maybe. And we shared ideas from sport pedagogy, which have largely been developed from Kathy Armour far back as 2008, 2011, and seeing very much a fluid camp position here, where there's an idea that things are ecologically driven. What's possible in context is shaped by different constraints of the environment, the coach's capabilities and skills, the athletes you have in front of you, and also the tasks or the intentions that might be driving what's at play. And a nice discussion that links back to a conversation I had in one of the breakout rooms was that it's not just one-way traffic, that the coach might make sense of a bigger picture and just implement things straightforwardly. There's an idea that big picture might inform your practice, but your practice might also help you to understand and interrogate the big picture as well. And that's why that arrow's there, two-way arrow saying this informs your coaching practice, but your coaching practice over time may also help you to understand things that are inherent in the bigger picture. So this, I think we'll just do this task in the chat room, and some people have got some great things on there already as we've been talking through. I'll just pick up some of those now. There might be a few more things that come through as well. An idea that Beth's looking for pedagogy to, what is the connection to context? And hopefully I'll get to that as we go through, as we talk about negotiating boundaries towards the end. Fiona, you're talking about how does it actually fit into coaching? What does this mean? What does it look like on the ground? That's a really important part of what I'm hoping to do in today's session. I don't want you to go away and think, this is great theoretically, but what does it look like on the ground? And I'll hopefully start to make inroads there when we talk about vision and we talk about a repertoire that you have to have. And that might make things a bit more applied. And David and co recognising that pedagogy, a takeaway message was it was the unseen. And I've mentioned Heather already saying it's a bit of the black hole of practice. It's big and vast and helps us to make decisions. One last one here. Yeah, people saying here, thanks Alistair, saying there's a big difference between understanding pedagogy versus this idea of being a user of pedagogical tools. An obvious thought, absolutely, that we want to move beyond this idea of pedagogy just being abstracted and removed from practice, similar to Beth's point. How do we actually start to connect with pedagogical ideas and bring them into our practice? And I think vision and repertoire will help us with that. And I think vision will help us move beyond this idea that we just coach skills, or we just coach knowledge, or we're just looking for results. What else is in the coach's wider responsibilities for athletes in general, the welfare, the type of players and performers that you would like to see? How do you develop them socially, emotionally, cognitively as well? So I'll hopefully touch on a bit of that as well about wider ideas of vision. Anything else? Do you want to say anything here, Derek, in terms of, we'll just move on?
I think that's covered everything in the chat, yeah, unless anybody has any reflections they want to unmute and come in on.
Okay, thank you, everyone. All right, so on to the making connections part. I'll build this diagram up and it'll appear again at the end. We've talked that pedagogy is the big picture last session. And it's almost today's about saying, well, so what? You've told us there's a big picture. What do we do about it? And I think there's three areas that I'll try and talk about that I've mentioned already. That'll be vision, coaching repertoires, and negotiation. I'm seeing these, as the diagram illustrates, as nested, interconnected, not separate from each other. I think they all bounce off and play off each other in terms of what they mean to each other and also to the bigger picture. And my argument, I guess, throughout will be that we have a bigger picture. What does that mean? What does it look like? We shared last time. So what do you do about it? And I think to connect with the bigger picture, to acknowledge it, a one-size-fits-all approach in terms of how you practice or how you lead practices with athletes, I think we need to move beyond the one-size-fits-all, especially with the bigger pictures. populated with big and diverse expectations for what athletes are supposed to be trying to do. And a one-size-fits-all might connect to some of that, but not all of it, and being able to shift your practice coaching repertoire of ways you interact with athletes, I think is one way to try and connect to the demands of that bigger picture. The next bit I'll talk about will be about vision, which I see connecting in with negotiation. The bigger picture can be overwhelming. The bigger picture can be daunting. The bigger picture might have too much there at times. The bigger picture things might be there that you might not necessarily agree with or necessarily understand or necessarily want to just accept. And I think your vision, which we'll recognize could link to more popular ideas about coaching vision, I think that's really important. It'll give you a bit of a lens to look at the bigger picture. It might be that there's too much there, and your vision of what you want to achieve in coaching practice might help you to prioritize what's important in the bigger picture. It might help you to challenge the things that might or shouldn't be there or are being forced into that bigger picture, and it might just help you make sense of it in terms of what you need to do next in your practice, understand your practice, and to take it forward. So I think your vision is important. If you don't have a vision, the bigger picture might become your vision, and I think that would be quite overwhelming. That vision is also important. I've spoke a bit last time and mentioned it briefly at the start, that I think there's bigger and more stakeholders starting to have a voice, or certainly a seat at the table from what I can see in the sport coaching literature, and not having a voice that you can clearly articulate and argue, I think is a way that your voice might get lost or misunderstood or not heard. So it could be a way, and vision certainly used in an education circle, and some people, possibly more from the States than in the UK, have started to use this as a way to what they're calling speak back or talk back or fight back against efforts to control and dominate what coaching is that's not listening to and understanding coaches themselves or teachers themselves. So I think vision is quite pivotal in relation to repertoire, but also that bigger picture as well, which may also inform those negotiations that I'll speak about last. So we'll start with coaching repertoires and this idea that a bigger picture can sometimes be too large and diverse and full of so many possibilities. The work of Jennifer Garvey-Berger, sorry, got the term eventually. Somebody talks about complex leadership in the States. Very much to say you need to understand at times to go to the bigger picture and look at all the diverse messiness that's there and when to sort of close that down. And I don't think we can wallow in the big picture at all times. There's sometimes when you have to start to prioritize what's important. And your coaching repertoire is helpful in terms of what you can do and how you can respond. I mentioned before that the bigger picture, it might demand more than a one-size-fits-all approach in terms of what it is for athletes to perform or athletes to develop. And this coaching repertoire apparently is extremely important. It's comes from a teaching language, but I guess it would be the same. It's important to cope with those pedagogical, even contextual demands that coaches might be faced with. So the coaching repertoire deployed in a way that might connect to the bigger picture is one way that you might start to meet the demands of athletes in your care. It's not the only way. I'll speak about more, and there could be other possibilities that people have out there that might come through in the breakout rooms and the chat, but it's one possibility. To meet the demands of the bigger picture, you might have to be able to shift and adapt and change your practice based on those different demands that you see and are presented. Of course, sport coaching is inundated with possibilities for this repertoire. We have coaching frameworks, looking at the work of Lyle. We have different models of coaching, which could be linked back to some of Cushion's work. Styles of coaching, which is some of the early work of Woods. More recently, nonlinear pedagogies. Toolboxes from Abraham and Collins are just some of the possibilities. So we're not lost for options here. There is ways that coaches might want to expand how they interact with athletes instead of a one-size-fits-all approach. So if we think about the work of Woods, for example, one of the earlier interpretations might be slightly outdated now and be superseded by other models. But the idea here is that there's different styles that person has set out. Talking about command styles in terms of how you might interact with athletes, that's certainly one possibility that I can recognise from a teaching world. Reciprocal styles, where there might be a bit of a two-way relationship between athletes and coaches, and possibly each other. Problem-solving styles, and you've got scenarios set up where you need to solve possibilities and ways ahead. And ideas that things might be guided, and there might be sort of a way that people can discover for themselves. So that's just one person's framework that's out there, and some of those might have chimed with you, some not. Interesting here, this connects with some of the work of Cope and Cushion, but also Richard Tinning's work, where he said it's not necessarily the breadth of the repertoire. Okay, that's great to have, but that in itself is not enough. So you might be able to interact with athletes in a very, very broad way, but the real skill is to try and match the response, the style, the model, the part of the framework to the demands that are in front of you. So sometimes it can be a misconception that being able to interact in a broad way, that's a sign of a good coach or a good teacher. But the skill is, yes, deploy it at the right times and in the right ways. And an interesting chat that we had on Wednesday's session, I think Kevin very cleverly said it's about different strokes for different folks. And that, I think, captures nicely this idea that what are the different strokes we're looking at here? How do we need to match them to the athletes that are in demand? So on to reflective task 2, and we'll do this depending on how the numbers work for Derek and his side. We're not going to go too far through all of them, but what are the different elements or parts or possibilities of your own coaching repertoire, or the athletes that or the coaches that you work with? Do we have a repertoire? Can we move beyond one sort of response that you have? I'm pretty sure you can, but do you know that? Are you aware that you do that? And what are the different parts of it? And linking back to what people talked about on Wednesday, if you've got this repertoire, how does it change across people that you're talking to, across different levels of performance? Some people are here from a more grassroots perspective, other people are here at elite levels at sports. So how do these repertoires shift and change across different levels of performance? How do these repertoires need to shift and change across different activities that you're all involved in, and the differences between them? So coaching repertoires, do you have different elements to your own, or the people, do they have the people that you're in charge of, the coaches you oversee, and how does that shift based on the demands of activity and performance level?
Right, I've got rooms set up here, Paul, so we'll be going into rooms of 5 and there'll be one room of 4. Do you want to set a time limit on people coming back, or are you happy with 7 minutes or so?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool, I'll just start the rooms just now.
Vinny was cut off in his prime.
Oh, he listened so well and then came in, but ran out of time. We could put that in the chat, Vinny, or share it in the main room. It sounded like it was going in the right direction there.
Does this all the time, Derek? Chops you off in your prime.
Yeah, that's a operandi for sure, Vinny. Yeah.
I'm still yet to have my prime, even though I'm aged a little bit.
Paul, I'm assuming you're back and you're keen to
I'm back. Yeah. Is the presentation? Let me come back up.
You need to reshare it.
Reshare. Okay. Yeah, we had maybe get some views in the chat. It was very lively and interesting in our room. If there's any other comments about coaches, coaching repertoires, the breadth of them, the relevance of them.
I'll go if that's okay.
Yep, and you
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I was kind of just rambling really, as I normally do, but just kind of thinking that in terms of the different elements of the repertoire, it's really, I think the second question, it needs to be pretty broad, but then trying to describe what the different elements of that broad repertoire are is really tough, because it's from a lifetime so far of different experiences, quite a number of which are actually outside of sport. So, and it's very much instinctive to either approach a certain task or group with a particular device or tool or approach in mind, or to again almost subconsciously feel that something's not working, so I'll try this, I think this will work in this scenario. All of that's very unconscious, and this is the work of developers and mentors and things to try and bring that to the surface. But this is what I'm realizing now, and in terms of coach development, the challenge to help other coaches broaden is really understanding my own repertoire first, and trying to describe that, and that's a pretty busy scatter diagram, if I'm honest, but wouldn't be a wasted effort on my part to try and sit down and decode what's in my head. I don't think I'd ever fully do it, because there's things that are buried and it will only come out in certain circumstances, but I'm now thinking that that's what I need to do, is go away and sort of decode my own repertoire.
Yeah, that's. I knew that we wouldn't be able to. Can you hear me, folks?
Yeah.
Am I back yet? Yeah, I knew that I want to give us 2 tasks, and I knew that was going to be a lot to do in that time. So again, feel free to keep going with these tasks as we as the session or the weeks go on. I think you're absolutely right, that we need to be careful about labeling things and careful about adding things to our repertoire. I think some of it is deeply personal and built up over time, and even having a clear element in that repertoire. It doesn't necessarily have to be a very solid one that can't be shifted and tweaked. I'm not saying these is rigid, and I think you're right, to get these to work, they're going to have to be made to fit into context as well. So that was coming to me there. Maybe mapping your repertoire might be a helpful exercise. It might never come to an end, but I think it could be useful to start to think about what the different elements are.
Would anybody else like to share some of their reflections? Simon, I know that you were in a room with Jamie. I think it was just the 2 of you in the room by the end. Do you guys want to share your reflections with him?
Yeah, Jamie might. I'm throwing him under the bus here, but Jamie might actually be better coming in, because we're speaking a lot about I suppose what they've done as a governing body, and around, I suppose, the freedom for people to use their repertoire, and a coaching system that promotes, supports, and allows that, versus maybe other qualifications. Certainly the sport that I deliver qualifications within, it feels very, very much the opposite of that. You know, you're sort of supporting coaches that there is all this stuff out here, but in order to get through this qualification, we're only going to let you use this little bit. So I think that's really where the bulk of our conversation was.
Yeah, I'll jump in if you're happy, Derek. Like, I suppose in the conversation we talked about you understanding the people, so that cohort of players that you have in front of you as a coach, you really what are their needs, and then what's your vision for where you would like them to be. And I think it's then trying to draw the strands out. We talk about repertoire. What sort of things are required of the coach to ensure the players engage with the sport, and what are their needs as people as well. So rather than necessarily dictate or direct them to a certain style or way, it's maybe make them curious about what their players need, and then how do they go about delivering that. And when those questions start to come out, be in a position that you've got some answers or solutions that they can start to put into play.
Yeah, it's thank you, Jamie and Simon. It's similar to a conversation we had in the breakout room with Vinny and Alan, talking about wanting to use your repertoire but not being able to, asking athletes to do things in your repertoire and they're not ready for it. And again, ideas that what works for some might not work for others. So again, trying to find ways to negotiate opportunities, helping athletes to, at over time, being able to do certain parts of your repertoire. So Alan's example was one of his colleagues in swimming was looking to get athletes to take control at university level, take control of a group and lead it, and they weren't willing or able to do that leadership in terms of giving control away. And it might be that they don't want to, it might be that they've never had the chance to, but how over time would they start to, if that's one of the main overarching ideas about wider athlete capabilities, how do we start to get them to be able to do and take on those roles? And then other ideas too, as Simon was talking there, it reminded me of some reading I've done recently on Stephen Brookfield's work. He talks about critical reflection, and he's got some brilliant scenarios in his book. And it's the idea that he wanted to, as a young teacher, to just give all the control away, but the pupils themselves wanted and expected certain things from him as a teacher, which they weren't getting when he just gave all the control away. So there's that understanding of athletes and what they expect of you and what the role of a coach is in their eyes. I think there's something there that Jamie was talking to about expectations of the coach and what you want them to do and what their role is, and how that might have to change as well. Just looking at the chat as well.
I'm still to kick on.
No worries. There's so much in the chat as well. See, just to come back to Alan's point there about styles of teaching. I haven't mentioned those. They're quite popular in the physical education world. Do we use these and do we not use these? And also, styles are one-off things in your repertoire. Sometimes can be a standalone, and I didn't get a chance to share with Alan that some of the styles literature research that's coming out is having a bit of a go at this idea about things being molecular or sort of single, short-lived. So using a style or using a practice might actually just need a bigger, wider philosophy that maybe it's going to go on for a longer period of time. So, and the last point, which I guess Simon was referring to there, is the possibility that it's actually really hard to broaden your repertoire. Why might this be difficult? Well, like Simon was saying there, it might not be possible, it might not be expected, it might be frowned upon to connect to certain practices. And also, expanding your repertoire is not easy. Trying new practices, like Alistair was mentioning earlier, is doing them live with athletes in your session can be challenging and it's pretty stressful as well. So again, things to think about. It's not altogether easy. Okay, so connected to vision, repertoires is this idea of vision, and we're going to talk about vision and why deploying your repertoire may well be guided by a vision. So I don't think that repertoire gets deployed, hopefully not randomly, but there might be certain things that guide those decisions and those possibilities in your repertoire. I'm not talking about it in the same way as coaching philosophy, although I'm not in any way dismissing that term altogether. I'm just using a term vision because it's familiar to me, and I'm aware of some recent criticisms, mainly from Chris Cushion, about coaching philosophy, not about the term or the idea itself, but how it's deployed and operationalized by different folks. So we'll use vision. I think it's a bit more straightforward as a term, and hopefully that gets us out of big discussions about coaching philosophy is positive or it's flawed and so on. So we'll go with vision, and it might just give us an idea about how it can inform decisions that you make about your repertoire. So what is vision? It's been many things as well to many people, but one particularly helpful definition of vision is from Karen Hammerness, and she talks about it as it's the images that people have about the practice, what they want to see or hear, or what could be or might be in their coaching sessions, in the club, and what connections the practice might have to the wider demands and needs of communities and societies and so on. She talks about various dimensions of vision. She talks in this quotation about this idea about reach. How far do you want your vision to reach? Does it just stay in the session, or you try to develop people and athletes outside of the session? Are you trying to connect to making sport different? Are you trying to make the community, the world a bit different? So connections back there to this sort of fixed, fluid and transformative camp. She does have other dimensions of vision about distance. How far away are you from your vision and achieving it or getting near to it? So again, these ideas can be motivational if your vision's in reach or in touch. Again, vision might move beyond this idea of we're coaching knowledge and skills only. And I know that's not the case, but it's some people's perception of that. And this idea that we might be able to embrace some of our personal goals. So Alistair was talking there about his life experiences in sport and beyond that, and how these things are all coming to the fore when he's talking about his repertoire. Same idea here. What are your personal goals? How do these transfer into your sort of the context of coaching and also back to your personal life? And this idea about vision starts to connect with what we're doing beyond knowledge and skills, and what else the coaches or what else they're expected to achieve through the act of coaching. What wider developmental, so social, mental, emotional capabilities do you want athletes to develop? And how might personal lives and experiences of coaches be wrapped up in all of that and their wider ideas about social justice in the world? So you might be able to go beyond the coaching of skills and practices. Yeah, so another reason why I think this is important, yes, it can inform your repertoire and your decisions you make about your repertoire and what you do in sessions to develop athletes in particular ways. It's also connecting back to the bigger picture and this idea that without a vision, you can end up, whether you're inexperienced as a coach or you're a veteran coach, is an idea that you might end up just gathering endless amounts of stuff. You might just find some tricks and some tips and all the endless know-how out there. You might not have a very clear and articulated lens to try and decide what is the key bits of information in the bigger picture that are important for me right now in this context. And it's about being a little bit more secure about what's important and what's not, and it might inform how you learn, and I'll say more about that as a coach and how that might be part of our future discussions that we might have as coaches. So that it can provide some coherence to that bigger picture. It might be able to prioritize certain aspects of the bigger picture, let you know that some parts of that bigger picture need to be parked for a later point. It might drive might help you to reflect, having a clear vision and how a practice was to unfold in a game situation or another performance. To judge and understand next steps, and it might help you discuss and think about your next steps as professional.
Paul, are you still there? The gremlins are back. Paul, are you still there?
I'm back again.
You're back again, yeah.
Sorry, folks.
Is your video off?
I've turned it off, yeah, because I think it was starting to go on the blink a little minute ago. So that is off. My mobile phone's turned off as well, just for extra measures. So yeah, I finished up that slide there by saying vision might also give you a steer on next steps, professional development in relation to your vision, but also in relation to understanding and connecting or challenging some parts of that bigger picture that we talked about last time. So again, I'm not expecting you to be able to do this in the time that we have. I think we might just focus in on if you want to, and you can clearly do part one, feel free to do the middle bullet point. But I think let's go into breakout rooms and have a discussion about what is your coaching vision. And if you want to say philosophy, that's absolutely fine. So what is your mission statement, your aims, intentions, your wants, desires? So what is your coaching vision? Can you clearly articulate it in a sentence or two? And if you're willing, I realize this might be personal, very personal for some. Share it with other folks, and if that task set ends really quickly, feel free to think about how has that been shaped, what sort of professional, personal experiences have steered and shaped that vision over time.
Cheers, Paul. I'll just getting a quick sense of people. Did everybody get that task given Paul just dropped out at the very start?
Sorry, everyone. Am I back
You're
now?
back.
Brilliant. So yeah, just point one and point two. Point one, hopefully. Point two, if you've got time. But what is your coaching vision? Can you articulate it? And if you're willing, share it with others.
Cool. I'm just about to start the rooms then. Hopefully, what I'll do is I'll bring people back at 3:05 because there's quite a lot in this one.
Oh, right.
Vinny, I do believe you're cut off in mid-flow again. It's a conspiracy here, I think. So yeah, just folks, anything on the chat that was fascinating in the room that I was in, was in there talking about vision, the ups and downs of it, how far it can actually go in some performance environments was interesting, and how the personal might come into how you respond as a coach. So anything about vision, coaching visions, coaching philosophies, what they are, how they evolve, what yours was, and how, if at all, it goes beyond the knowledge, the skills, the performance elements that seem to be quite popular. Yeah, it was very interesting and deep in the Alan, Vinny, Paul room, talking about past lives, past careers, and how that translates into the coach and the coach.
So we were talking about how the philosophy can quite drastically change depending on where you are in sport, whether you're at the community end or the performance end. And I was just reflecting on my own context within a talent pathway, and for the individual coaches, whether we want them to have, I mean, they've all got them, but how explicit their personal coaching philosophies or visions are, as opposed to the overarching needs of the program. So the difference of people's visions from where they are within the scheme of sport, but also the context they work in, whether that's in an employed, paid capacity, that all affects what is overt and not, I guess.
Yeah, thank you, Alistair. That's sharp as always on that front. There's a bigger dimension that you've raised there about, yes, personal vision's helpful, but how, if at all, does that articulate with a bigger sort of community vision, sport vision, club vision? And do you want these individual visions there? Do they connect? Do they not connect? I'm involved in a sport coaching project at the moment. It's very early stages, and it's about volunteer coaches. And it was an idea that all of the philosophy or all the visions was steered only by the sport idea. This is how we do things here. This is how it's done here. And I was sort of, links to Alistair's point, I got that. Go and satisfy their own personal desires and ideas about coaching. How does that connect? And I think it's right, Alistair. I don't think it's simple to get that shared vision that might be needed and communicate that.
Are you happy to press on, Paul? Just it's 3:10. Paul's still here.
I'm back again.
You are back again. Do you want me to share the slides, Paul, and that saves your bandwidth a wee bit?
Please. Yeah, that'd be great. So yeah, I don't know if I finished off fully with Alice's point. Again, the individual versus the corporate and organisational is a great point to acknowledge. I don't think it's simple and straightforward to get those individuals and the corporate connected. It might take a lot of time and a lot of clarity about what individuals and their own place and space as well.
Well, I'm just about to share the slides on your behalf, Paul. So if you just want to stop sharing your screen, and that you should be able to see the slides now. Let me know, everybody, if they're not there.
Sorry. Come back again. Yeah, I was just saying thanks, Vinny, for this idea of pushing the system and boundaries. That might help us to move on to the next reflective task. That, Derek, I think we're on task 3 at the moment.
Yeah, I'll just get to it just now.
Sorry. Thanks.
There we go. You want to move on to the next slide?
Yeah, I think just looking at time, we've got another discussion task to do, and it might, I was saying there, fit in nicely with Vinny's idea about cognitive dissonance and moving in, settling in, fitting in and not fitting in. So we'll move on and start to talk about negotiation, and mostly talk about negotiation of boundaries and what those are and what that might look like, and how it might fit with some of Vinny's comments there in the chat. That this vision making will not take place in a vacuum. I think that vision will develop over many years, be informed by very much some of your personal experiences and ideas in coaching and outside of that, and also through your negotiation experiences of different multiple boundaries and engaging with those on a regular basis. This might have similarities and might connect to some ideas about contextual power brokers that I've seen and read about in the literature. I'll call them negotiating boundaries. You might think how that connects to other ideas that are similar in the coaching world, contextual power brokers being one of them. So we'll talk about boundaries and how these might be the limits of space or a social grouping that we might be part of in context. Move on for us, Derek. It sounds a little bit nebulous at the moment, but I'll get to this. I'll move it forward. So boundaries are found almost everywhere, and in the multi-layered environment in which a coach will function and operate, and might include, for example, the different tasks and experiences they're trying to attempt over time. To give it a little bit more focus, let's just approach this idea that boundaries can take on different forms and maybe physical, cognitive, social, or emotional. And positive features at times, these boundaries might actually facilitate progress and success, or they may at times be negative and actually hinder progress and development of coaches and their environment. They are ambiguous, so let's just be really clear that I'm not saying that the boundaries will be the same for everyone at all times. So just saying that these boundaries are ambiguous, so they're different for everyone. So individuals may react to similar boundaries in different ways, depending on their own experiences and physical, cognitive, social, emotional capabilities. Or different individuals may react to the same boundaries in completely different ways. So again, we're seeing possibilities for change and difference here. Thanks, Derek. Move on, please. So negotiation of these boundaries is important so that we can be adaptable and can change and advance, progress. We need to identify boundaries. I don't think all of these boundaries are always possible to shift and negotiate. It might be that boundaries you're able to influence and manage some, but you might also be aware that you'll have no chance, certainly not in the short term, of connecting and influencing, manipulating different boundaries that are in your the boundaries that you can influence, and identify what you need to do. Next steps, professional development is important.
Paul, are you there?
Yeah, I'm back.
Yeah, you're back now.
Thanks. Are you okay to move on? Thank you. Okay, so I'll try and put this in a bit more shift. We're back again. Yeah. So just talked about boundaries, what they are, ones you can manipulate or shift or change, ones that you can't in the short term at least. We'll now just start to frame them across different categories. And we'll just use a sort of an ecological lens to try and put this in context, which is quite helpful that some people at the start were saying, well, how does this look in context? Pedagogy, and I think negotiation is a key part of trying to sort of connect to that bigger picture and the demands of your context. There might be individual boundaries, so that might be the coach's cognitive, social, emotional, physical capabilities, characteristics, and so on, and experiences. There might be environmental boundaries in your context that you work as a coach, immediate coaching context, including the people or the athletes, performers you have in front of you, but also in the broader club or community or national settings. They may well have policies and practices that might be expected, like what Simon was saying earlier. Some things are not possible in this context, in this activity, which might be one of your boundaries that we can talk about now. There might be some task-related boundaries, some cognitive, social, emotional aspects of a task or the sport you're doing. These again might be demands of what's possible. Boundaries wise might be linked to the activity that you're all involved in, and these are different. So I'll try and put this in context, folks. I don't want to lose people with these different levels and different frames and so on. So in a coaching session, for example, task-related boundaries, I'll just read this off, I penned it earlier. Task-related boundaries may include the intentions the coach has for a session, a series of practices that are planned for the athletes, the relationship the coach has with athletes and how well they know them and don't know them, the relationship and familiarity that's there. Some nice discussion in the breakout room I was in earlier about that, and the demands of getting to know athletes and how that informs what you do. The individual factors might be the knowledge the coach has, how deep and aware they are of different demands of the session and the different parts of it that they're busy leading at that time. The coaching skills they have, how the coach is feeling physically, emotionally at the time based on personal or coach-related issues that are swirling around. The knowledge they have of athletes in the session. Environmental boundaries could well be the physical space, facilities that they're coaching in. That again hampers what can and can't happen. The equipment they have available, the time they have for a session, the club vision that was mentioned there before from Alistair. National policies that might be influencing the sport that's being delivered and pursued. Other boundaries might be unexpected at times, might need to be negotiated in the immediate session. It could be the time of day, the poor weather that we have, injuries that come across, issues that you come across with athletes, falling outs and so on. And coaches may have to self-organise and negotiate these different boundaries to meet what they're trying to achieve in a session. So again, we're seeing here that some of them might be quite predictable in terms of the coaching space and facility that's available and equipment, and some might be more open-ended and unseen and being able to adapt and respond to those. So I hope that tries to put boundaries in a bit of context. And sometimes we talking about the bigger picture, and sometimes we have to absolutely narrow the boundaries right down because of pressure, challenges, issues, unseen things. Sometimes the boundaries have to go really, really tight, and we have to play inside those. And that can be helpful to consolidate practice and progress. It can also at times for coaching and also some of the athletes be a little bit boring possibly. In terms of progress, sometimes you've got to push around the boundaries, and that might lead to ruffling a few feathers. That might lead to certainly challenging and your progress and making that advance, or certainly in some ways be more possible or likely to advance, and other times it might actually be quite stressful to push boundaries. Too many boundaries at one time might actually lead to being quite stressful. You might explore beyond the boundaries or cross many boundaries. That might lead to a lot of creativity in terms of who you're connecting with, what types of knowledges and ideas you're bringing together, what repertoire ideas are coming into your practice at different times. Could end up being quite creative, and it may also be a bit of a disaster, very chaotic at times. So we're seeing here that boundaries don't always have to be challenged all the time, and linking back to the suggestion I made a few slides ago that you're going to have to pick and choose which boundaries are able to be negotiated and challenged and pushed, and other ones that certainly in the short term you're going to stay solid with. So I don't think we're pushing all the boundaries all the time. I think you, as a coach, you'll be able to make those decisions in context and in terms of making things progress and change. So let's have a think about next slide, Derek. So again, we're just conscious of time. We might not get through all of this. I think just 5 minutes. I'm not going to ask you to do all of them, but maybe just think about boundaries that you face, and choose either major task ones relating to your sport or make individual one-off task.
Paul, you there? We may have lost you, Paul. Paul, are you there?
I'm still there. Yeah, I'm just was saying just task. Did you get all of it?
No,
Back again.
It strikes me that you have problems with your internet every time we get to a discussion slide. Do you want to repeat that?
Yeah, I was saying we're obviously having a few tech issues and we're getting tight on time. So I think just 5 minutes for this task, and then it's a last discussion task. I think about main individual boundaries for yourself or some of your athletes, some of your coaches you're in charge of, and just one of task or environmental. So one about your context that you're in.
Cool. Do you want to go into breakout rooms for this then, or do you want people to just do it independently?
Yeah, I think just in the chat would be fine, Derek. It might be nice if this was linked to your current role. So what in your current role are your main about task or the context. So if you're ready to go, please fire anything about boundaries in your own context or individual or task demands. Feel free to add those to the chat, but don't rush. I'm not rushing you to fire something in there.